Can you talk about some of these delta states that you've kind of stumbled upon that seems to be kind of a new science, where you would think that a person in a delta state would be asleep, but in some way or some measure, they're absolutely not. And when we started doing our brain scans, we saw people producing such incredibly high amounts of energy in their brain, and they were having a very profound mystical experience. But when we looked at their brainwave patterns, they were in some of the lowest levels of delta. And I always thought, my goodness, delta is, the body's in a catatonic state, and there's not a lot of consciousness, and there's growth and repair going on, and there's not a lot of brain activity. Turns out that we could actually be in delta and be conscious. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that we've seen enough times in our scans.
I'm smiling as you're teeing up the question, Joe, because this is literally the thing I'm most geeked on. And I think it's the most exciting and probably least discussed. I mean, your community may be one of the few that I'm aware of that are sort of exploring this heads up. So this actually came from when writing Stealing Fire. I was writing a section on William James, who was the Harvard philosopher, MD, founder of comparative religion and really much of kind of our personal growth space, really.
By the way, he's, to me, one of the most prominent people that influenced me in my entire life, because he's a pragmatist, and he taught pragmatism, which is, what are we going to do with all this stuff? And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but brilliant scientist from Harvard. Go ahead.
Yeah, and famously, he dabbled in nitrous oxide, and he used it, and it actually brought him out of a depression, and it actually created, if you've ever heard probably one of his most famous quotes, there are always other worlds separated by the flimsiest of veils between kind of this one and these other realms. And that experience of the nitrous oxide intoxication and revelation is what prompted his entire second half of his career and everything we really see as his legacy. And then at the same time, I just came across this random article describing Winston Churchill doing the same thing. And he's like, realm upon realm of almost alien powers disclose themselves, and he was on a trip to the United States. He was in New York, and he was getting out of a taxi cab and forgot that traffic went in the other direction. And he walked smack dab into an oncoming car, shattered his bones, and then by pure fluke, I think this was in the 30s, got taken to a hospital where one of the only doctors yet to do it was working with anesthesiology and was using nitrous oxide. And so he went on for the rest of his life to continue to use it as a tool of transcendent insight. So I'm like, wait a second. These are guys I respect and appreciate deeply. I always thought that was just like something that kids did at concerts. So did a little digging. And in 2015, these researchers in MIT's anesthesiology department had been studying 50% oxygen, 50% nitrous oxide inhalation, because obviously this is used in dentist office, it's used by midwives. The WHO calls it on its list of essential medicines. It's this analgesic, anesthetic, all these things. As I started researching, I'm like, oh, wait. So nitrous oxide prompts norepinephrine, endorphins, and dopamine. So that's like 3 of the top 6 big hitters. And this was the novel finding that they came up with, which was, holy smokes, it puts you into double amplitude delta wave activity for 3 to 12 minutes after inception or induction, and then your body and your brain normalize and you go back to kind of where you were. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that the key? Is that the actual secret sauce? Because continually users, from James to Churchill to lots of other bright lights and notable intellects, had all said, yeah, it's amazing. It gives you the secret to life, but then you forget it. And I was like, oh, is that you're getting access in the delta wave state to this superordinate information, right? And then as your brain waves re-escalate, you can no longer open that file, right? It was encoded down at delta, and you're now back up in beta or whatever. And so it kind of slips through your fingers. And then at Stanford, Carl Diceroth, who's the sort of father of optogenetics, so like tweaking things in mice so that you can then activate different gene function via light. He was doing a study on ketamine, so a very different, but also an anesthetic, and this is a key thread to follow, right? Where they were studying, and ketamine, by the way, it works on the glutamate receptors, but it also delivers a deep brainstem reset, which is part of its healing power. He was using mice and epileptic humans, patients, so they could actually talk to him and tell him what they were experiencing. And he was creating the dissociative experience that comes with that compound. and then monitoring EEGs. And he found it was 3 hertz, which, delta waves are typically 0.1 hertz. So that's barely not brain dead, up to about 4 hertz. And he was zeroing it in at 3 hertz. And then he's like, okay, so people are having out of body experiences on this compound and their EEG signature is 3 hertz. Now let's electrically stimulate these humans' brains. He optogenetically stimulated the mice. Let's ping them and put their brains back at 3 hertz without the drug. And they had the same out-of-body experience. And then a recent study, if you guys are familiar, I'm sure, Joe, I think I remember from your laptop, right? You do lots of radar plots. So looking down on brain scans from the top of people's brains, there's another compound, 5-MeO-DMT. Like if you've seen The Simpsons and Homer Simpson licking a toad and having a wild psychedelic experience, that's a play on that one, right? So it's a very potent psychoactive that many users report delivers you straight to like white light God consciousness. So you're like, okay, so clearly they're getting a lot of information too. And the radar plot of that study was at the moment of induction, complete cross-hemispheric delta waves just lit up all the way across the brain and fully connected, which is wildly unusual. So you kind of see all these things and it's not, hey, folks, there's tons of good drugs to do. It's, hey, it seems like, and whether it's electrical stimulation, whether it's orgasm, whether it's visual VR and AR and like a visual stimulation, right? Whether it's body work, whatever these things are, it seems like time and time again, when people are reporting these profoundly rich states of being inside their own minds, and by their own reporting are saying, I had the cheat codes to the universe, I had the answer to everything, et cetera, it is often correlated with delta wave activity. So to me, that is one of the most fascinating and curious possibilities, because so much of the health giving effects, so much of the trauma relief, so much of the antidepressive effects are coming from one of our colleagues, Dr. Ryan Darcy. He's kind of Canada's top TBI neuroscientist. He's working on electrical stimulation through the tongue to the cranial nerve. So another way in, right, is that he calls it a global nervous system reboot. And it's like if you've had your laptop open for too many days with too many windows, and then suddenly your like video camera on Zoom doesn't work. And you're like, what the hell is going on, right? And if we just hit the off button, turn it all the way off, hit on again, and it comes back the way it should, into balance, into homeostasis, then we can live forwards from there. So you're like, okay, so not only is it an on-off button when things get glitchy and staticky with all of our micro PTSD, it lets us discharge that, like literally going down to almost off. But it just happens to also include epiphany and revelation that people continually report is profoundly meaningful, inspirational, and helpful.
This is speaking to me so well because, first of all, and like you, in my own personal experience, I have had those moments where I've been locked in kind of sleep paralysis. I was very deep in a state, and at the same time having very profound insights, really meaningful information that I say to myself, I swear I'm going to remember this. It makes so much sense. And I can't move, so I'm left with just the understanding of, oh my God, this is really profound. I know I just got to remember it. And I literally come back to my awareness and I have absolutely no memory of it at all, except I just have this thought somewhere at some time, it's all going to make sense to me. But I have no recollection of the experience, not even a simple connection to it. But it seems like in Delta, we are resetting everything at the brainstem, to the very root of our rudimentary functions, where all those visceral things happen to us. And we are, in a sense, wired for wholeness, and we're wired for transcendence. Being able to regulate your brain states, and brain waves, we practice that so much in this work. And now we're getting a lot of people that can change their brain waves into alpha in a very short amount of time. And now carving that path even further, we got a lot of people that are actually to move into low states of theta, where a lot of regeneration goes on. And you have these moments where people really slip very deep into this delta state. And somehow, in my own personal experience, I come out of it in this state of euphoria, in this state of my body. There's a reboot that takes place where I'm actually very jubilant.